Welcome to the Drum Shuffle, a podcast offering insights, perspectives, and conversations for drummers. I'm your host, Jamie Eads. Hey, how's it going, everybody? Jamie Eads joining you as always. Thanks for tuning into the Drum Shuffle. This is episode 24. Hope everybody had a great Independence Day holiday here in the States. Our neighbors up to the north just celebrated Canada Day. Summer is in full swing. As a matter of fact, I just got back from the Summer NAMM show down in Nashville. Had a great time hanging out with my buddy Josh Touchton from Natal Drums. Got to see Kent Oberly from Dream Cymbals. Just saw all kinds of cool gear. So we had a really good time. Hope everybody's summer is off to a great start. We've got a great episode for you today. We are being joined by jazz legend Peter Erskine. So please stay tuned. Los Cabos drumsticks may be the best kept secret from drummers today. Los Cabos Drumsticks makes the finest tools to touch a drummer's hands in the business. The best news, almost every popular stick size is available in both white hickory and red hickory. If you don't know what red hickory is, it's made from the heartwood of the hickory tree, unlike regular white hickory, which is made from sapwood. Red hickory drumsticks will hold up to even the hardest hitting drummers. Their durability comes from the density of the wood, but they do not sacrifice the feel. Please visit LosCabosDrumsticks.com to learn more about their products. And don't forget to ask at your favorite retailer for Los Cabos drumsticks. All right, gang, as I mentioned, our guest really needs no introduction, but I'm going to try to do this justice. Peter Erskine, of course, a member of the Modern Drummer Hall of Fame, just a legendary jazz and fusion drummer. Peter studied at the University of Indiana. He has over 700 albums under his belt, 50 of which have been released under his own name or as a co-leader of the band. He has played with Weather Report, Steely Dan, Joni Mitchell, the Yellowjackets, Pat Metheny, you just name it. Peter Erskine has done it, so we were very glad for him to take some time and come on the Drum Shuffle and talk with us. I think it's a great interview, and I hope you guys will really enjoy it. So without further ado, let's welcome Peter Erskine to the Drum Shuffle. Good morning, Peter. How are you today?
I'm fine, Jamie. Thanks for calling.
Oh, thanks for taking time to come on the Drum Shuffle. We really do appreciate it. Peter,
it's my pleasure. Sorry to interrupt you.
Oh no, that's fine. It's a great honor for me to have just a luminary in the world of drumming on the show. It's a great honor for me, as I said, and I want to offer congratulations because 2017 you were elected into the Modern Drummer Hall of Fame. Correct?
That's right. I thought you were going to congratulate me for the fact that our daughter, Maya Erskine, was just named one of the top 10 comedians in Variety magazine to look out for in this coming year. So I'm so excited about that. The Modern Drummer thing was nice, and I'm grateful to all the readers of the magazine for voting that way, and it's always an honor to be mentioned, to have your name placed alongside those of not only your colleagues who you respect so much, but your drum heroes, the men and women, but primarily, to be honest, mostly men who have created the language of the drums.
Well, sure, absolutely. And growing up, I can remember at least 3 or 4 issues of Modern Drummer that you graced the cover. And I know that you were voted, best jazz drummer of the year multiple times. I'm going to guess a dozen. You've just been so prolific with your output over the years, and typically on our show, we say, how did you get your start in drumming? But I think you've been doing it for so long, everyone knows who you are. But, just your work, Weather Report, the Yellowjackets, as a band leader, you've put out just dozens upon dozens of records. I guess what I'm trying to get to in terms of a question is what's left to do in your career, really?
Well, thank you, and I'm glad you stopped with I appreciate it all, but my teacher, Professor George Gaber, would always say about things like awards. He'd say, "Yeah, that and 25 cents will get you a ride on any bus in New York." The price of a bus ride has gone up quite a bit, but I think the sentiment remains still accurate in that those things are nice, but how should I put it? It's an acknowledgement that people are listening to the work you're doing, but it doesn't really affect the way you sound, the way that you play, and ultimately that's the most important thing. So I'm going to take this opportunity to make this a bit of a teachable moment, not to you, but just to any listeners who might be interested. As drummers, we tend to get hung up on the, how do I sound? And we get self-conscious. And this is true, I think, of most performers. How does the other perceive me, right?
Sure.
So when you surrender that and you realize that, if you're playing the drums and Steve Gadd and Brian Blade and Dave Weckl and Eric Harlan or whoever, walk into the jazz club, let's say, your first thought will be, wow, I wish they'd been here for the earlier set. But you might start playing differently. You're all of a sudden self-conscious and you start second guessing your choices. If you kind of spin that around to the wow, what a treat, what an honor that someone like these drummers have come in here, and realizing that whatever they think, it doesn't change the way you play, and you have no control about what they think or how much attention they're paying to you or not. So by making the mistake of investing into what others think of your drumming, then you kind of fall prey to that syndrome of just second guessing all your choices and questioning your own value when it really should just be, you should just tune into what you're playing and play what you want to hear. I mean, that's the ultimate freedom, and that's the promise of music, that within the confines of whatever job we're doing, we have an infinite number of choices. We can play what we want, and that's the only thing you really need to satisfy ultimately. So once I learned to not worry about, does he like it or does she like it? Just do I like it? And after many years of listening to music and being somewhat well informed about musical choices, I can make those decisions. Now, if you put me in a situation of hey Pete, play this Metallica tune, no, I wouldn't know what to do, because I just don't know that language. And that's not to say that I don't like the language. I have great respect and admiration for drummers who play all the different styles of music. It's, they're all different skill sets and a lot of things I can't do, but certainly I can't speak that language. So of course, then I would be kind of looking around, did I just say the right thing or not? But if you're working in a musical environment that you're conversant in, with that language, that style, whatever, you got to trust yourself. And so that's my long way of saying, have fun when you play, folks. Life is short.
Yeah, and I mean, you bring up so many great points in what you just said. I have said for many, many years to my friends that are great jazz drummers, I can't do what you do. That's not how my voice comes out on the instrument. I grew up in the rock and roll world. Mm-hmm. And I think however much time I spent playing along to, Zeppelin records or whatever the case may be, I would have to spend that same amount of time, in jazz or funk to get to that same level of playing. So I understand exactly what you're saying with the Metallica analogy.
But it's interesting. It raises a question. Probably more drummers, let's say at a certain age, like midlife, more non-jazz drummers seem to turn to jazz versus the opposite, versus like jazz drummers saying, wow, now I want to discover my roots. I mean, in fact, I sort of have done that opposite because I'm realizing that the way drummers played in early jazz and in early rock and pop, there's a tremendous number of solutions to be found there for drumming questions, I guess. But by and large, most drummers sooner or later seem to have a longing to develop more skill sets that come from jazz than the opposite. Yeah, I just bring it up as a question.
Well, I can only, answer that personally. And it's a great question, but, I have found the older I get, I've been playing for, probably close to 30 years now. I've been doing it since I was, just a wee little guy. But I have found that my love affair with jazz grows by the day. When I was younger, I was like, oh, it's cool. I understand these are great drummers, but it wasn't my bag, if that makes sense. Mm-hmm. I just kept gravitating towards rock and hard rock and pop music. I just, it wasn't that I ignored jazz. It just wasn't really on my radar. And as I've gotten older, I think you're right. My love affair with jazz has grown and grown. I still can't play it very well, but
I'll press the question. Why?
I don't understand the improvisational aspect of jazz. I'm not good at that, just kind of comping with a band. That's not my thing. I was always, I think, over rehearsed. Now, as I continue playing, I try things now and I'm starting to understand it a little bit better, but I always wanted to know exactly what I was going to do. And I'm a groove guy. I don't have tons of chops. So, my focus has always been on, the backbeat, quite mm-hmm. honestly, which in a lot of jazz music, it really isn't there from the drummer. It comes from the other instruments in a trio or a quartet. But as I watch guys like you, quite honestly play, I'm starting to understand it a little bit more. And, if somebody put a gun to my head and said, okay, you're going to play with a jazz trio, I could make it through a set, but I don't think it would be up to the standard that I would expect from myself, if that makes sense.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, no, good answer. My thought on it is that I think at a certain point in everyone's life, you want to understand the source. This is why science exists. It wasn't just so to invent the fax machine or the iPhone or whatever. I mean, it's to understand where we've come from to better anticipate where we might be going. So a tremendous amount of science is dedicated to discovering some of these basic truths about ourselves. And the drum set, it's a child of the jazz age. I mean, it was created to play that music. The original setup came out of the first time that a bass drum was set on the floor and a pedal contraption was attached to it. And instead of having one person playing a bass drum and another playing a snare drum, they decided, well, instead of two people, we can have one fellow taking care of this. And then tom-toms were added, and then going from the low boy hi-hat and the contraptions before there was a hi-hat to the modern day hi-hat, et cetera, et cetera. I didn't mean to get into a history of the drum set, but
no, it's fine. This is great.
The drums came out of pretty much this creation of jazz and improvised music, and the drummers were more relegated to providing something similar to a backbeat, and they started improvising, and even in a lot of the early Dixieland things, you can hear the drummers are kind of winging it. But bebop is where things really opened up for the drummers, and then modern jazz kind of coming out of that. What's funny, the older I've gotten, the more comfortable I've become with just playing that 2/4 backbeat in the context of jazz, kind of doing my Sam Woodyard with Duke Ellington sort of thing, or the way that Alvin Stoller or Irv Cotler would play on some of those Sinatra recordings. Just a nice, fat 2/4, but in a swinging context.
Sure.
And it swings. I mean, I love all the post bop, the Alvin, Roy, Jack DeJohnette, and Tony, and all those things, and pretty early on in my drum education, I gravitated towards a lot of that. Blakey and Max Roach and Buddy Rich were three of the first drummers I really listened to, and then Don Lamond and Ozzie Johnson. His name's not so well known, but they just happened to be on these recordings that I played over and over. And then Shelly Manne and blah blah blah. Long list. The interesting thing, I was speaking with pianist Kenny Werner about this. I just kind of lost thread of what I was talking about, but he said he's noticed in a number of drummers, and he works mostly with drummers who live and work in the New York City area, that as they get older, they're playing more and more in an old style. So anyway, what I was saying was when I was younger, I was really, I was into the, not playing the bass drum, not feathering the bass drum, and just using it for syncopated accents, and so I kind of learned the history of the drum set a little bit ass backwards, and I never had a teacher who showed me a lot of the basic snare drum method books, or the Charlie Wilcoxon solos, a lot of the things like where the Philly Joe kind of drumming the technique and ethos came out of. So I had to kind of learn all that stuff by ear. And now that I'm a teacher, I'm a professor at the University of Southern California, we very much address the methodologies. Where did Philly Joe? Where does his drumming style come from? How did he develop the sticking patterns he uses? How did that influence other drummers? So I think the reason that a lot of rock drummers have this sort of quest, like this sort of like there's something missing here in my development or existence as a drummer. It's that quest to get back to the origins of the instrument, and that undeniably has to do with jazz. We can't escape it. We shouldn't want to escape it. We should want to embrace it because it's such an important part of the history of the instrument. So it's not like, jazz is hip or jazz is this or that. The drums are a jazz instrument for starters, and to not investigate that sooner, eventually you're most likely going to want to later.
Yeah, I completely agree. And, I've heard quotes from you saying that you were a huge Beatles fan as a young man, and that you
completely
that you loved rock music. But, I've seen photos of you as a child on stage kind of playing jazz. And if I'm not mistaken, please correct me if I'm wrong, but your father was a bassist. Is that correct?
Yeah, he was a psychiatrist by the time I was born, but he paid his way through medical school playing the bass. He had a jazz band. The name of the band was Fred Erskine and his Music for Moderns. And since we're recording this a couple days before Father's Day, it's a nice way to pay homage to him and remember him. I had one brother and two sisters. So four kids growing up in the house. I was the youngest, and I was the one that just loved the music he liked playing on his record player, which was jazz. But when the Beatles came along, in 1964, on American TV, I was totally swept up. I loved the sound. I loved the beat. And those early, a lot of those early recordings, Ringo's beat does have a swing feel to it of sorts. It's kind of a shuffly bounce. It bounces, it dances, and their harmonies were great, and their songs still sound good. They were just an incredible event in I think the timeline of music history. And I feel really lucky that I got to hear it. Now, it wasn't like, I saw the Beatles and decided I wanted to be a drummer. I already felt pretty far along the way. I'd started when I was 4 or 5. So, I'm 9 years old when the Beatles came on. And in fact, I used to wonder, I was like, wow, how would they sound if, like, Elvin was playing with them? I don't think they would have sounded very good, but as a kid, I used to what if Grady Tate played with the Beatles?
Oh, that's fantastic. I had never visualized that before until just now, Peter. So
no, you can't unvisualize that.
Yeah,
I'm sorry.
You can't unsee that. I think that's a really good point. And, you mentioned the fact that we're recording this, just before Father's Day. And of course, the news broke yesterday that Elvis, his longtime drummer, DJ Fontana, had passed at the age of 87. But, those early rock and roll guys, now I'm not saying Ringo was an early rock and roll guy, but he was certainly, one of the guys that brought that to the masses, on the Ed Sullivan Show. But the early rock and roll drummers came from, what people say, it was rockabilly, but most of those guys were jazz drummers that were twisting their way of playing for this new music called rock and roll.
Yeah, exactly. And the earliest studio drummers, drummers in New York or Los Angeles, the New York drummers like Panama Francis or even Gary Chester. They were all jazz guys.
Right.
I read about the passing of Mr. Fontana, and I was a bit of an Elvis fan too when I was a kid. Hound Dog I used to love singing that. I just thought it was so cool, and even as a young kid, I could recognize when I heard it coming out of the radio. I said, "This is different." It just had a different energy to it.
Right.
And I think I think the difference was the how should I put it? Even if there was a swing feel, there was a lack of a politeness that was associated with most other pop music. I don't know if that's the right word, but there was something that would reach out from the speaker of the radio, and it, obviously it was unmistakable to so many people who heard it, because it was like, wow, this is something new. And we all got our information. It was either through TV or the radio, and there were not that many channels of information. Now with the internet, I mean, who knows where you're getting information, and many sources as there are readers or consumers
sure.
of data. But so it was a simpler process somehow to keep track of musical development. And in the 1960s, particularly the mid to late 60s, when rock was just finding, wow, we can do this, we can do that. And then jazz got very turned on by that. Like, wow, well, we can do this or we can do that. I've said this before. Every new album started to feel like a postcard from the future. And it was literally exciting to get a new record. Whoa, now, I mean, the great thing about the internet, myself or my students or anyone interested in the music can find just about anything. When I was a kid, you had to be lucky enough to have the TV turned on to a particular station, and if you missed it, chances were you'd never get a chance to see it again. But the way that we got exposed to music, and of course we got to see it live, but you could just spend enough time with each new album that came out, so that you really digested it. You really knew like every note, and the way that radio worked. That if the Beatles or the Beach Boys or whoever came out, and I should mention Rolling Stones. Sorry, I wasn't a Stones fan as a kid, but when I look back now at some of the early stuff, it's pretty great. But I was a Beatles guy, and then I became a James Brown guy. Anyway, try to go down memory lane. But the amount of time that we got to spend with the music is a little bit different now. It's you have a different rapport when you spend a week listening to one album as opposed to spending a day trying to pick from 4 million songs on Spotify or something.
Well, I mean, that's a great point as well. And, I have, bemoaned and decried the fact that there's just oversaturation of music. And maybe I'm an old soul. I don't know, but I'm still the guy that likes a physical copy. I'm a CD guy. I have a turntable, all that stuff, but that's, my vinyl collection is pretty much things from the past. I'll get a new vinyl record every now and then, but
wow. You know what I'm doing tomorrow? I'm meeting with a buyer from Disc Union. It's one of maybe the biggest record store in Japan, and I'm selling off almost my entire LP collection. I sold several hundred LPs to Amoeba Records here in Hollywood, but now I have about 1,000 more. And I just finished the last spreadsheet entry on it last night. So I've got everything cataloged and so I'm except for one shelf of LPs. Anyway, I'm sorry, I interrupted you. You're talking about your CD collection.
No, that's fine. And I guarantee you I've got some listeners that will be looking up that record store to try to find something out of the Peter Erskine collection.
Man, some of the I was like, wow, I can't believe I'm going to part with this. It's just amazing stuff that I spent a lifetime collecting. When I used to go to Europe, I would look for, and not just jazz stuff. I was looking for a lot of classical percussion rarities, I would just lug around this suitcase for a couple months until I got close enough to home where I could either mail them or give them to my parents. This is like when I was on the Stan Kenton Big Band. I was always filling up my suitcase with LPs, just stuff like, whoa, the recordings you'd never find in a record store in America. I couldn't, I'd have to wait maybe 6 or 8 weeks until I got close enough to home where I could then play them on my dad's stereo system. You're right. It's a whole different age, but we live in the time we live in. So,
well, yeah, very true. I've been very fortunate, that I guess that I grew up. I've seen the best of both worlds. I am of a vintage. I was born in the late 70s, the mid to late 70s. Where I witnessed the birth of the cassette. I witnessed the birth of the compact disc. So a lot of my favorite records I've bought, 3 or 4 times on different formats.
I witnessed the birth of the 8-track cartridge.
I'm not trying to age you here, Peter. But all joking aside, I got a hold of your new record, the group that you're calling Dr. It's a double record. Half was done in the studio and half was kind of live. And I have spent some time with it. My wife and daughter, my daughter's very involved in ballet and loves all kinds of music, but we've been kind of just jamming on that record around the house here for
fun.
Yeah, for the last, I don't know. I probably got it a month or so ago. And I want to talk a little bit about the record because it's so good. I think some artists, you have, I think, 700 album credits to your name. And I think some artists, when they get to that point, it's kind of an afterthought about putting out a new project. But what I was taken with as soon as I put it on was, wow, this is great. It's truly, you can tell you guys put some time into it. And, I have so many questions about it, but I do want you to talk a little bit about the record. I know it was mostly recorded live, what research I've done, but it's just a great double record that I want our listeners to check out.
Well, thank you. It's the third Dr. album, and it's the second one that we recorded, in the studios up in Fort Wayne, where Sweetwater is headquartered. Now, if there are any musicians listening, I'm going to assume most of your listeners are musicians, particularly musicians who buy any electronic gear. Chances are pretty good you're familiar with Sweetwater. I think now they're the largest online music retailer. They built a state-of-the-art studio there. Of course, if you want any piece of equipment, they have it. It's pretty remarkable. I'm not exactly sure how it all happened, but we were invited originally to take part in it was like a recording engineers camp or a workshop, where recording engineers generally from the Midwest, would come to the studio and they'd watch us in session, and the managing engineer, Mark Hornsby, would say, well, this is how I'm miking the bass drum, and this is the kind of compression I'm using, blah, blah, blah. And so we almost, like we're the animals in the zoo being observed, doing our thing. And they said, and you can keep the master tapes. Well,
they couldn't find like some kind of local garage band for this, Peter. I mean,
they had done it with a couple of other artists, and this was all becoming part of a tour of the Midwest.
Sure.
then all of a sudden they said, marketing department wants to postpone this engineering thing. And I said, whoa, this is a problem. We're kind of stuck out there in the Midwest, and I've committed. I've purchased all the flight tickets for the band, and so Mark stepped into the rescue. Said, "Look, why don't you come to the studio, and let's just concentrate on making a record this time." And so they very graciously gave us the studio time, and I thought, well, why not? It might be interesting to work on a project and not be home, so that at the end of the day, we don't all just drive home in all this LA traffic and get back into our own little universe and then come back into the studio. So you're kind of there, and Fort Wayne's a very nice town, but for four fellows from Los Angeles, there's not like a whole lot. Unless the minor league team they have there was playing a ball game that night, there's not a whole lot that would be too tempting to do. So we pretty much just stayed in the studio and worked, or went out for dinner. So that was the album titled Second Opinion. And I loved the sound that we got in the studio, and I loved that focus, somehow that focus of everyone's energy, just like, we're here, let's just think about the music. Okay. So fast forward to last June, and they said we would actually like to do the engineers workshop this time around. So I said, okay, fine. And I was going to treat it pretty much just like that, and we didn't do much in terms of pre-production, preparing the music. And then I thought, wait a minute, we should try to, if we're going to record, let's do it for real. So now we have this wonderful audience, and these engineers were pretty much all fans, and so they dug what we were doing, and so they were interested not only on a technical level but on a musical level, and that was a fun audience to have in the studio. We were challenged by this lack of pre-production, but it just got everyone's improvisational juices flowing, and John Beasley helped corral the music into really great shape because he's such a wonderful music director and arranger. And Bob Shepard on saxophone, Benjamin Shepard, spelled differently, no relation to Bob, incredible young bass player from New Zealand.
Man, you said a mouthful there.
Yeah.
Wow.
He's unbelievable.
Where did you find that guy? I mean, that's
John Beasley recommended him, and I told Benjamin, and I mean it, that not since Jocko have I run into a bass player that has been that much fun to play with and that good.
Wow, that's saying a lot right there, folks.
Yeah, he's really something. And, of course, there are a lot of other bass players I love to play with, but Benjamin does have something beyond outstanding and unique. And so, anyway, the quartet's a lot of fun. And I realized, wow, we got an album. Now, it's like the old days vinyl album in terms of the amount of music. And I said, that's good. I mean, in the old days, sometimes records would be between 25 to 30-some minutes long. CDs, it can be too much music. One of my favorite albums that I made, an album called Sweet Soul, it's too long. And I always regretted that I added that one extra tune. And we didn't even put everything on that we had recorded. But 70 minutes of music in one sitting, that's a lot, Anyway, I said, we'll put this out, Then the band went on tour, and a few months after the tour, the tour organizer, Alessandro Travi, he said, I got these Pro Tools files, and here are the rough mixes. And I walked by the front of house sound desk at the end of this concert. I saw this Pro Tools session running on a guy's laptop, and I said, "What's this?" The guy said, "Oh, I recorded." He said, "Well, you have to give me the files." And the guy was, "Yeah, fine." So he said, "I think this is your next album." And I listened to it, and I was just stunned how good the performance was. So I sent all these tracks to Mark Hornsby at Sweetwater, and I said, "Look, let's not put ourselves in this dilemma of our own making of having to choose one or the other. Let's put them both out." And it kind of harkens back a bit to the first full album I made with Weather Report, a double album called 8:30, which was originally supposed to be just a live album, but due to a colossal engineering mistake one day in the studio, the key live piece got partially erased. That's a long story. I think I talk about it in my book, No Beethoven. Anyway, it was a happy accident because we decided, well, let's go in the studio, and so that's how the 8:30 album became whole or complete. And I thought, let's do that with this. So I'll pick the best tracks from the concert and the studio thing, and we'll see what happens. It's not my swan song, but it might be the last Fuzzy Music project. I'm not sure. It's been a lot of work. It's been a lot of fun over 20-some years having our own label. But it's a lot of work for my wife. It's a kitchen tabletop operation. And I said, well, if I got to, we're going to go out, let's go out with a real bang. And I think it's the best recording I've managed to make as a drummer. And I'm not saying it boastfully. It's just seems like everything's sort of come together, and kind of feeling that way about my drumming in general. It's never been as fun, as interesting, and as sort of natural. It's like I don't fight the instrument anymore, and I think that's one of the great things about growing older. You just realize you don't have to fight everything in front of you.
I think you are onto something there. And I will say this about the record. The one track that I keep going back to, and another, shout out to Benjamin Shepherd, is Hypnotherapy.
It's pretty funky, isn't it?
Oh my God. I mean, look, I've played with some great bassists over the years, but if I could manage to get this guy on retainer, I would probably take out a mortgage, because he's special. There's no doubt about it. But the song is just so good. And, I felt like your playing on this record it sounded like it was more energized, and certainly had a little bit more funk to it, if that makes any sense to you.
Total sense. That's the whole idea of the Dr. Is it's funny. I was sorting through old paperwork. I came back from this most recent trip to Europe. Our office worker and my wife said, "Well, we got a box of stuff for you to go through." And I found all this fax correspondence, and between myself and Walter Becker, and I was pitching a project to Walter. It was going to be an R&B funk project, and the name of it was going to be Dr. Now, the same source, Jack Fletcher, who I mentioned, I think on all the albums, he was the guy that suggested it to me. And he was writing lyrics, and he's long been wanting me to do some kind of funk or R&B thing. And then the idea, lay dormant for a long, long time. And then he said, "Hey man, you got to do it. It's time to put out Dr. So it was thanks to my old high school buddy that I said, yeah, a little more energy, enough of this anti-drumming stuff. I've explored that as far as I can, and it's the less is more aesthetic comes into play. I mean, you can hear it even on this and on some of the funk stuff. I mean, it's pretty unnotey, and that's what gives it its feel or power. Yet I'm not afraid to have some fun and play too. And and it's I think it's a result. of kind of a learning process. Recently, I've been checking out, and this is where Facebook has been cool. I've been checking out, drum videos that Mike Clark would post, and then this great drummer Herman Matthews, who subbed for David Garibaldi for a while on Tower of Power.
Mm-hmm.
Boy, if you're not familiar with Herman's drum, you should check it out. It is so funky, and I was just checking out the way, just how simple he played, but how much energy there was. So the strength was not coming from a bunch of notes. The strength was coming from the intention,
Yeah.
And of course that would be appealing because that taps right into what I was trying to figure out in terms of, the creative jazz stuff. How can I make the drums do what I want them to do, but get away from the flurry of notes, because it was the interruption of flow that was bothering me. Not even necessarily the amount of notes, but my inability when I was younger to complete, let's say, musical or drumming sentences without just burping in the middle of them. For lack of a better term. So now I think, I'm kind of getting that one figured out, and just having so much fun doing it.
Well, and it shows on the record. I mean, I mean this sincerely. It's one of the better records that has landed on my desk in the past year. Honestly, I just
excellent.
I love it. It's fantastic. Peter, I want to be very respectful of your time. We're getting towards the end of our interview. One of our traditions here on the Drum Shuffle is we always ask our guests for a good piece of advice for other musicians, other drummers especially. Your career just speaks for itself, so we are all dying to hear your piece of advice for other musicians.
My piece of advice?
Yeah.
Well, at the risk of being redundant, that's never stopped me before. Play what you want to hear. Don't try playing what you imagine someone else might want to hear. Just trust yourself, trust your judgment, play what you want to hear, and have fun. That's my advice.
Oh, that's great advice.
Right. Oh, okay. I'll add one more.
Okay.
2 more. Can I add 2 more?
Absolutely. Yeah, this is your show, Peter.
All right. Okay. So the next one is, this comes from the medical profession. Do no harm.
Oh, yeah.
And my third one, make sure you register and vote in November. All right.
That's really good advice.
Yes.
There's a whole lot of people out there saying they don't like the way things are happening or they love the way things are happening. That is your opportunity to either continue it or change it.
All right.
Peter, thanks
so much for the call and the opportunity to speak with everyone in Radio Land.
Absolutely.
And thank everyone out there for still listening to my music. I appreciate it.
Well, we appreciate you taking time to come on. You're welcome here anytime. Keep us posted on any new happenings in Peter Erskine world. Folks, the album is called On Call by the Dr. Band. Go find that record. You're going to love it. Peter, thanks so much.
Thank you.
Talk to you soon.
All right.
Bye-bye. All right, gang, that's going to do it for episode 24 of the Drum Shuffle. Thanks so much for tuning in. We really do appreciate it. As always, I'm going to ask you to go ahead and hit that subscribe button so that you don't miss a single episode. Leave us a rating or review. It helps us tremendously to continue to grow, and we really do appreciate it. Many, many thanks go to Peter Erskine for taking the time to come on. What an honor to have a living legend like Peter come on our show. We really do appreciate that as well. Next week, we are going to be joined by really a founder of West Coast punk music. That's right. DJ Bonebreak from the band X will be on the show next week, so you're not going to want to miss that. And we're working real hard to get some really cool guests on the show moving forward. So again, thank you so much for tuning in. We really do appreciate it. We can't do any of this without every single one of you. So until next time, may your heads stay strong and your sticks never break. Cheers, guys.